Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2. And as we learnt earlier this programme, the Home Office will seek to appeal against the High Court's refusal to allow it to intervene in the case of a hotel used to house asylum seekers in Epping.
Here is Security Minister Dan Jarvis confirming the government's decision when he spoke to the media earlier today.
This government will close all asylum hotels and we will clear up the mess that we inherited from the previous government. We've made a commitment that we will close all of the asylum hotels by the end of this Parliament, but we need to do that in a managed and ordered way, and that's why we'll appeal this decision.
Well, let's bring in our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, this is going to be a very politically consequential appeal.
It is. It's a really difficult one, clearly, for the Home Office, because they are very worried now that multiple councils are about to come forward and mount similar legal challenges to the one that Epping Forest District Council so successfully brought earlier this week. So they are going to mount this appeal. It's an appeal against the decision that they couldn't intervene at the last minute to present their side of the argument. Why they left it to the last minute, they still haven't answered. And then if they're granted that element of the appeal, then they'll also asked to be included in any appeal that the hotel owners, Samani Hotels, may bring against the injunction that means the asylum seekers are going to have to move out. Now, we just had a statement from the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. It's quite long. I'll spare you the usual stuff at the start about inheriting a chaotic and broken asylum system.
Never mention that, do they? We should mention it more.
But she goes on to say, we agree with communities across the country that all asylum hotels need to close, including the Bell Hotel. And we're working to do so as swiftly as possible as part of an orderly, planned and sustained programme that avoids simply creating problems for other areas or local councils. As a result of piecemeal court decisions or return to the kind of chaos which led so many hotels being opened in the first place. And she adds that that's the reason for the Home Office appeal in this case, to ensure that going forward, the closure of all hotels can be done in a properly managed way right across the country without creating problems for other areas and other local councils.
And yet this government has been in office for more than a year. In a matter of weeks, we constructed Nightingale hospitals during the pandemic. If this was a genuine priority of this government, they could have used ex-military bases, they could have used post-industrial sites across this land to construct, yes, not high-quality accommodation, but some accommodation nonetheless. It doesn't need to be 5-star, 4-star, 3-star hotel standard. I mean, the government really could get a move on and do this far quicker.
They could absolutely, but then they get into new territory of being challenged by all of the activists, the human rights lobby, who say that you can't possibly go down this route of large-scale camps with Spartan accommodation, because that's going to infringe the human rights. So that would be a whole new battle that the government would have to go into. Remember, the same kind of challenges were brought against the Conservative government when they wanted to introduce the Baby Stockholm barge, and they did for a while before that was scrapped by this government. I was on that barge and the accommodation was perfectly fine. You know, decent-sized rooms. They had 2 bunk beds, 1 bunk bed in each room, so you could have 2 people in each room. It had their own shower, plenty of room for storage, for hanging your clothes and all of the above.
Recreation room with pool tables and all sorts of things.
Absolutely. They had a television room with settees around it, multiple TVs you could watch. They had a games room with pool tables, darts, everything you could imagine. They had gyms. They had an open area that you could go and sort of exercise in, or just go outside for a smoke. They had a lovely sort of canteen restaurant area. It was nice. And honestly, it was.
And they also had a dentist and a GP on call, unlike the people in the local area who were waiting up to 6 months to get
Yes, they actually had a doctor's surgery within the Baby Stockholm barge.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for that. Now, we can also get the thoughts of political commentator Jonathan Liss. Jonathan, good to see you. Thanks for joining us today. This is, you know, the government have been ridiculously slow on this. Everyone could see it coming. What is wrong if the hotels have to be closed of putting migrants in camps? We put our army serving personnel in camps, so what's wrong with putting migrants in them?
Well, I don't think the prison camps are the answer.
Didn't say prison camps, said army camps.
Look, there's a middle ground there, okay? That I think that no one is saying that asylum seekers have to be housed in 5-star accommodation. That's obviously like a myth put out by the right to kind of.
Well, the Britannia Hotel in Canary Wharf is 4-star.
No one says that they have to be housed in 5-star accommodation, Tom. It's about that's a trope by the right to mock and to denigrate the position of the left.
Hang on. Is it a trope if it's actually happening? If people are being put in 4-star hotels, like the Britannia Hotel, a very expensive hotel in Canary Wharf, very posh district of London.
You have to put them in a 5-star hotel. If that was the hotel that was available to the government, they had no choice. But it's certainly not a requirement. No one is saying that asylum seekers have to be housed in sort of, you know, palatial luxury. It's about assuring human rights and guaranteeing a basic standard of living. And obviously, where you come down on that will kind of differ from person to person. So it has to be sort of arbitrated by, for example, the judiciary, which decided that the BBC.com was not fit for habitation. One detail that Mark omitted was that there was an outbreak of, I think, Legionnaire's disease. I think it was Legionnaire's disease, which meant that people weren't able to stay on that barge very long. So, you know, it wasn't exactly Butlins. So there are obviously obligations the government has to asylum seekers. And the problem is that if you get rid of the hotel option, which the government is obviously very, very loath to do, and that's why I expect this will go all the way to the Supreme Court, you have to have another option. You have to have an option B that is acceptable to everybody, and that will be very, very difficult to find. So the people who right now are clamoring to close down, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, I think it's difficult. It's difficult to find because of the Immigration and Asylum Act 1999 that set this minimum level of standard for accommodation for asylum seekers, and the standards have grown over time through, some might argue, judicial activism, others would argue righteous judicial decisions. But the minimum floor that we have in this country, legal floor for asylum seeker accommodation, seems a lot higher than countries like Greece or Germany, where people are put in camps. In Germany, up to 2 years you can stay in this sort of initial reception centre type setting. I mean, ultimately, the Tories couldn't change this because they didn't have a majority in the Lords, and they were towards the final 2 years of their terms. They couldn't use this parliamentary mechanism called the Parliament Act to ram it through the Lords. But this government could. They could change the law. They could find a coalition in the House of Lords, mandating Labour Lords, and the Tories would likely vote for it too, to change the law to lower those minimum standards, to establish, at pace, alternative accommodation. Do you think they will?
I don't know if they will, is the honest answer. This government is certainly no fan of asylum seekers, and it's certainly in a great rush to appease would-be reform voters. So I don't think that they're on the side of the human rights activists by any means. And then it's certainly in no rush to win back a lot of the voters who are leaving Labour for the Green Party or potentially the New Left Party run by Jeremy Corbyn. So, you know, I wouldn't put it past them, but I do think that it should actually be a matter of national pride that we decide that asylum seekers have a basic level of sort of rights and obligations towards them, and that we should house them adequately.
So, Jonathan, you think the government are right to appeal this?
I think they have to, Dawn, because there is no alternative at the moment. And this takes it out of the morality of it, about whether you think it's right or wrong for asylum seekers to be here, right or wrong for them to be in hotels, right or wrong for them to be deported. If you take away the hotel option, there is no good plan B right now. So, you know, a good option would have been to house them in the local community and fund local government to do that. But, you know, that also creates new problems, and the people who are clamouring now will be clamouring even more loudly then if you have houses of multiple occupancy, for example, that are used to house asylum seekers in the community. So, you know, there are no good options. And this is not a good, no one's saying that hotels are a good option. And one thing that I think we have to keep reminding people of, this is a huge victory for neoliberalism, which is one of the reasons that the coalition government set up these hotels in the first place or expanded them. Private contractors have made tens of millions of pounds off these hotels.
Sorry, why is this a victory? Why is this a victory for economic liberalism or neoliberalism? I mean, the hotels are being procured by the government because of a state-imposed law, gold-plated by judicial activism, that sets a higher minimum standard of accommodation in this country than just about any comparable country for asylum seekers.
John, they used to be housed in the local community. It's not beyond the wit of man to get back to a situation where asylum seekers can be housed with government funds, rather than siphoning off tens of millions of pounds of our money into the hands of private contractors to house them at great expense in private hotels.
Jonathan, just quickly, we are running out of time. When you say house in the local community, we are having trouble housing our own people in the local community. Shouldn't they come first?
I don't think it's either or, and of course we have a huge housing crisis. We need to build more houses, and we need to, sort of invest in that and in public services. But we also have obligations under, international law, and it's not a crime to claim asylum in this country. The majority of those asylum seekers
It is a crime to come here illegally on a boat.
And no, it is not a crime to claim asylum once you're here.
No, it's a crime to cross the channel on a boat.
It's simply, there are no safe and legal routes to claim asylum, and claiming asylum is an internationally recognised human right. And we take fewer asylum seekers than comparable European economies.